On Idolatry, chapters 1 through 9 by Tertullian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 1. Wide Scope of the Word Idolatry. The principal crime of the human race, the highest guilt charged upon the world, the whole procuring cause of judgment, is idolatry. For, although each single fault retains its own proper features, although it is destined to judgment under its own proper name also, yet it is marked off under the general count of idolatry. Set aside names, examine works. The idolater is likewise a murderer. Do you inquire whom he has slain? If it contributes aught to the aggravation of the indictment, no stranger nor personal enemy, but his own self. By what snares? Those of his error. By what weapon? The offense done to God. By how many blows? As many as are his idolatries. He who affirms that the idolater perishes not, will affirm that the idolater has not committed murder. Further, you may recognize in the same crime adultery and fornication, for he who serves false gods is doubtless an adulterer of truth, because all falsehood is adultery. So too he is sunk in fornication. For who that is a fellow worker with unclean spirits does not stalk in general pollution and fornication? And thus it is that the Holy Scriptures use the designation of fornication in their upbraiding of idolatry. The essence of fraud, I take it, is that any should seize what is another's, or refuse to another his due. And, of course, fraud done toward man is a name of greatest crime. Well, but idolatry does fraud to God by refusing to him and conferring on others his honors, so that to fraud it also conjoins contumely. But if fraud, just as much as fornication and adultery, entails death, then in these cases, equally with the former, idolatry stands unacquitted of the impeachment of murder. After such crimes, so pernicious, so devouring of salvation, all other crimes also, after some manner, and separately disposed in order, find their own essence represented in idolatry. In it also are the concupiscences of the world. For what solemnity of idolatry is without the circumstance of dress and ornament? In it are lasciviousnesses and drunkennesses, since it is, for the most part, for the sake of food and stomach and appetite that these solemnities are frequented. In it is unrighteousness. For what more unrighteous than it, which knows not the Father of righteousness? In it also is vanity, since its whole system is vain. In it is mendacity, for its whole substance is false. Thus it comes to pass that in idolatry all crimes are detected, and in all crimes idolatry. But even otherwise, since all faults savor of opposition to God, but there is nothing which savors of opposition to God which is not assigned to demons and unclean spirits, whose property idols are. Doubtless, whoever commits a fault is chargeable with idolatry, for he does that which pertains to the proprietors of idols. Chapter 2. Idolatry considered in its more limited sense, its copiousness. But let the universal names of crimes withdraw to the specialties of their own works. Let idolatry remain in that which it is itself. Sufficient to itself is a name so inimical to God, a substance of crime so copious, which reaches forth so many branches, diffuses so many veins, that from this name, for the greatest part, is drawn the material of all the modes in which the expansiveness of idolatry has to be foreguarded against by us, since in manifold wise it subverts the servants of God, and this not only when unperceived, but also when cloaked over. Most men simply regard idolatry as to be interpreted in these senses alone, viz., if one burn incense, or immolate a victim, or give a sacrificial banquet, or be bound to some sacred functions or priesthoods, just as if one were to regard adultery as to be accounted in kisses and in embraces, and in actual fleshly contact, or murder as to be reckoned only in the shedding forth of blood, and in the actual taking away of life. But how far wider in extent the Lord assigns to those crimes we are sure, when he defines adultery to consist even in concupiscence. If one shall have cast an eye lustfully on a woman, and stirred his soul with immodest commotion, when he judges murder to consist even in a word of curse or of reproach, and in every impulse of anger, and in the neglect of charity toward a brother, just as John teaches that he who hates his brother is a murderer. Else, both the devil's ingenuity and malice, and God the Lord's in the discipline by which he fortifies us against the devil's depths, would have but limited scope, if we were judged only in such faults as even the heathen nations have decreed punishable. How will our righteousness abound above that of the scribes and Pharisees, as the Lord has prescribed, unless we shall have seen through the abundance of that adversary quality, that is, of unrighteousness? But if the head of unrighteousness is idolatry, the first point is that we be fortified against the abundance of idolatry, while we recognize it not only in its palpable manifestations. Chapter 3. Idolatry, Origin and Meaning of the Name. Idol, in ancient times there was none. Before the artificers of this monstrosity had bubbled into being, temples stood solitary and shrines empty, just as to the present day in some places traces of the ancient practice remain permanently. Yet idolatry used to be practiced not under that name, but in that function, for even at this day it can be practiced outside a temple and without an idol. But when the devil introduced into the world artificers of statues and of images, and of every kind of likenesses, that former rude business of human disaster attained from idols both a name and a development. Thenceforward every art which in any way produces an idol instantly became a fount of idolatry. For it makes no difference whether a molder cast, or a carver grave, or an embroiderer weave the idol, because neither is it a question of material, whether an idol be formed of gypsum, or of colors, or of stone, or of bronze, or of silver, or of thread. For since even without an idol, idolatry is committed, when the idol is there it makes no difference of what kind it be, of what material, of what shape, lest any should think that only to be held an idol, which is consecrated in human shape. To establish this point, the interpretation of the word is requisite. Eidos, in Greek, signifies form. Eidolon, derived diminutively from that, by an equivalent process in our language, makes formling. Every form or formling, therefore, claims to be called an idol. Hence, idolatry is all attendance and service about every idol. Hence, also, every artificer of an idol is guilty of one and the same crime, unless the people which consecrated for itself the likeness of a calf and not of a man, fell short of incurring the guilt of idolatry. Chapter 4. Idols not to be made, much less worshipped. Idols and idol makers in the same category. God prohibits an idol as much to be made as to be worshipped. Insofar as the making what may be worshipped is the prior act, so far is the prohibition to make, if the worship is unlawful, the prior prohibition. For this cause, the eradicating, namely, of the material of idolatry, the divine law proclaims, "Thou shalt make no idol," and by conjoining, "nor a similitude of the things which are in the heaven, and which are in the earth, and which are in the sea," has interdicted the servants of God from acts of that kind all the universe over. Enoch had preceded, predicting that the demons and the spirits of the angelic apostates would turn into idolatry all the elements, all the garniture of the universe, all things contained in the heaven, in the sea, in the earth, that they might be consecrated as God, in opposition to God. All things, therefore, does human error worship, except the founder of all himself. The images of those things are idols. The consecration of the images is idolatry. Whatever guilt idolatry incurs must necessarily be imputed to every artificer of every idol. In short, the same Enoch condemns in general menace both idol worshippers and idol makers together. And again, I swear to you, sinners, that against the day of perdition of blood, repentance is being prepared. Ye who serve stones, and ye who make images of gold and silver and wood, and stones and clay, and serve phantoms, and demons, and spirits in feigns, and all errors not according to knowledge, shall find no help from them. But Isaiah says, "Ye are witnesses whether there is a God except me." And they who mold and carve out at that time were not, all vain, who do that which liketh them, which shall not profit them. And that whole ensuing discourse sets a ban as well on the artificers as the worshippers, the close of which is, learn that their heart is ashes and earth, and that none can free his own soul. In which sentence David equally includes the makers too. Such, says he, let them become who make them. And why should I, a man of limited memory, suggest anything further? Why recall anything more from the Scriptures? As if either the voice of the Holy Spirit were not sufficient, or else any further deliberation were needful, whether the Lord cursed and condemned by priority the artificers of those things, of which he curses and condemns the worshippers. Chapter 5. The plea, I have no other livelihood, answered, and sundry objections or excuses dealt with. We will certainly take more pains in answering the excuses of artificers of this kind, who ought never to be admitted into the house of God, if any have a knowledge of that discipline. To begin with, that speech, wont to be cast in our teeth, I have nothing else whereby to live, may be more severely retorted, you have then whereby to live. If by your own laws, what have you to do with God? Then, as to the argument they have the hardihood to bring even from the Scriptures, that the Apostle has said, as each has been found, so let him persevere, we may all therefore persevere in sins, as the result of that interpretation, for there is not any one of us who has not been found as a sinner, since no other cause was the source of Christ's descent than that of setting sinners free. Again, they say the same apostle has left a precept according to his own example, that each one work with his own hands for a living. If this precept is maintained in respect to all hands, I believe even the bath thieves live by their hands, and robbers themselves gain the means to live by their hands. Forgers, again, execute their evil handwritings, not of course with their feet, but hands. Actors, however, achieve a livelihood not with hands alone, but with their entire limbs. Let the church, therefore, stand open to all who are supported by their hands and by their own work, if there is no exception of arts which the discipline of God receives not. But someone says, in opposition to our proposition of similitude being interdicted, why then did Moses in the desert make a likeness of a serpent out of bronze? The figures, which used to be laid as a groundwork for some secret future dispensation, not with a view to the repeal of the law, but as a type of their own final cause, stand in a class by themselves. Otherwise, if we should interpret these things as the adversaries of the law do we too, as the Marcionites do, ascribe inconsistency to the Almighty, whom they in this manner destroy as being mutable, while in one place he forbids, in another he commands. But if any feigns ignorance of the fact that that effigy of the serpent of bronze, after the manner of one uphung, denoted the shape of the Lord's cross, which was to free us from serpents, that is, from the devil's angels, while through itself it hanged up the devil slain, or whatever other exposition of that figure has been revealed to worthier men, no matter, provided we remember, the apostle affirms that all things happened at that time to the people figuratively. It is enough that the same God, as by law he forbade the making of similitude, did, by the extraordinary precept in the case of the serpent, interdict similitude. If you reverence the same God, you have his law, thou shalt make no similitude. If you look back, too, to the precept enjoining the subsequently made similitude, do you, too, imitate Moses. Make not any likeness in opposition to the law, unless to you, too, God have bidden it. Chapter 6. Idolatry condemned by baptism. To make an idol is, in fact, to worship it. If no law of God had prohibited idols to be made by us, if no voice of the Holy Spirit uttered general menace no less against the makers than the worshippers of idols, from our sacrament itself we would draw our interpretation that arts of that kind are opposed to the faith. For how have we renounced the devil and his angels if we make them? What divorce have we declared from them, I say not with whom, but dependent on whom, we live? What discord have we entered into with those to whom we are under obligation for the sake of our maintenance? Can you have denied with the tongue what with the hand you confess? Unmake by word what by deed you make. Preach one God, you who make so many. Preach the true God, you who make false ones. I make, says one, but I worship not, as if there were some cause for which he dare not worship, besides that for which he ought not also to make. The offense done to God, namely, in either case. Nay, you who make, that they may be able to be worshipped, do worship, and you worship not with the spirit of some worthless perfume, but with your own, nor at the expense of a beast's soul, but of your own. To them you immolate your ingenuity, to them you make your sweat a libation, to them you kindle the torch of your forethought. More are you to them than a priest, since it is by your means they have a priest. Your diligence is their divinity. Do you affirm that you worship not what you make? Ah, but they affirm not so, to whom you slay this fatter, more precious, and greater victim, your salvation. Chapter 7. Grief of the faithful at the admission of idol-makers into the church, nay, even into the ministry. A whole day the zeal of faith will direct its pleadings to this quarter, bewailing that a Christian should come from idols into the church, should come from an adversary workshop into the house of God, should raise to God the Father hands which are the mothers of idols, should pray to God with the hands which, out of doors, are prayed to in opposition to God, should apply to the Lord's body those hands which confer bodies on demons. Nor is this sufficient. Grant that it be a small matter, if from other hands they receive what they contaminate, but even those very hands deliver to others what they have contaminated. Idol artificers are chosen even into the ecclesiastical order. O wickedness! Once did the Jews lay hands on Christ. These mangle his body daily. O hands to be cut off! Now let the saying, if thy hand make thee do evil, amputate it. See to it whether it were uttered by way of similitude merely. What hands more to be amputated than those in which scandal is done to the Lord's body? Chapter 8. Other arts made subservient to idolatry, means of gaining a livelihood abundant, without having recourse to unlawful ones. There are also other species of very many arts which, although they extend not to the making of idols, yet with the same criminality furnish the adjuncts without which idols have no power. For it matters not whether you erect or equip, if you have embellished his temple or altar or niche, if you have pressed out gold leaf, or have wrought his insignia, or even his house. Work of that kind, which confers not shape but authority, is more important. If the necessity of maintenance is urged so much, the arts have other species withal to afford means of livelihood, without outstepping the path of discipline, that is, without the conviction of an idol. The plasterer knows both how to mend roofs and lay on stuccos, and polish a cistern, and trace ogis, and draw in relief on party walls many other ornaments beside likenesses. The painter, too, and the marble mason, and the bronze worker, and every graver whatever, knows expansions of his own art, of course much easier of execution. For how much more easily does he who delineates a statue overlay a sideboard? How much sooner does he who carves a Mars out of a lime tree fasten together a chest? No art but is either mother or kinswoman of some neighbor art. Nothing is independent of its neighbor. The veins of the arts are many, as are the concupiscences of men. But there is difference in wages and the rewards of handicraft. Therefore there is difference too in the labor required. Smaller wages are compensated by more frequent earning. How many are the party walls which require statues? How many the temples and shrines which are built for idols? But houses and official residences and baths and tenements, how many are they? Shoe and slipper gilding is daily work. Not so the gilding of Mercury and Serapis. Let that suffice for the gain of handicrafts. Luxury and ostentation have more votaries than all superstition. Ostentation will require dishes and cups more easily than superstition. Luxury deals in wreaths also, more than ceremony. When, therefore, we urge men generally to such kinds of handicrafts as do not come in contact with an idol indeed, and with the things which are appropriate to an idol, since, moreover, the things which are common to idols are often common to men too, of this also we ought to beware, that nothing be, with our knowledge, demanded by any person from our hands for idols' service. For if we shall have made that concession, and shall not have had recourse to the remedies so often used, I think we are not free of the contagion of idolatry, we whose not unwitting hands are found busied in the tendance or in the honor and service of demons. Chapter 9. Professions of some kinds allied to idolatry, of astrology in particular. We observe among the arts also some professions liable to the charge of idolatry. Of astrologers there should be no speaking even, but since one in these days has challenged us, defending on his own behalf perseverance in that profession, I will use a few words. I allege not that he honors idols, whose names he has inscribed on the heaven, to whom he has attributed all God's power, because men, presuming that we are disposed of by the immutable arbitrament of the stars, think on that account that God is not to be sought after. One proposition I lay down, that those angels, the deserters from God, the lovers of women, were likewise the discoverers of this curious art, on that account also condemned by God. O divine sentence, reaching even unto earth in its vigor, whereto even the unwitting render testimony. The astrologers are being expelled just like their angels. The city and Italy are being interdicted to the astrologers, just as heaven to their angels. There is the same penalty of exclusion for disciples and masters. But magi and astrologers came from the East. We know the mutual alliance of magic and astrology. The interpreters of the stars, then, were the first to announce Christ's birth, the first to present him gifts. By this bond, I imagine, they put Christ under obligation to themselves. What then? Shall therefore the religion of those magi act as patron now also to astrologers? Astrology nowadays, forsooth, treats of Christ, is the science of the stars of Christ, not of Saturn or Mars, and whomsoever else out of the same class of the dead it pays observance to and preaches. But however, that science has been allowed until the gospel, in order that after Christ's birth no one should thenceforward interpret anyone's nativity by the heaven. For they therefore offered to the then infant Lord that frankincense and myrrh and gold to be, as it were, the close of worldly sacrifice and glory, which Christ was about to do away. What then the dream, sent doubtless of the will of God, suggested to the same magi, namely, that they should go home, but by another way, not that by which they came, is this, that they should not walk in their ancient path, not that Herod should not pursue them, who in fact did not pursue them, unwitting even that they had departed by another way, since he was withal unwitting by what way they came. Just so we ought to understand by it the right way and discipline. And so the precept was rather that thenceforward they should walk otherwise. So too that other species of magic which operates by miracles, emulous even in opposition to Moses, tried God's patience until the gospel. For thenceforward both Simon Magus, just turned believer, was, since he was still thinking somewhat of his juggling sect, to wit, that among the miracles of his profession he might buy even the gift of the Holy Spirit through imposition of hands, cursed by the apostles, and ejected from the faith. And that other magician, who was with Sergius Paulus, was, since he began opposing himself to the same apostles, mulcted with loss of eyes. The same fate, I believe, would astrologers too have met, if any had fallen in the way of the apostles. But yet, when magic is being punished, of which astrology is a species, of course the species is condemned in the genus. After the gospel, you will nowhere find either sophists or Chaldeans or enchanters or diviners or magicians, except as clearly punished. Where is the wise, where the grammarian, where the disputer of this age? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this age? You know nothing, astrologer, if you knew not that you would be a Christian. If you did know it, you ought to have known this also, that you would have nothing more to do with that profession of yours. Itself, which forechanced the climacterics of others, would instruct you of its own danger. There is no part nor lot for you in that system of yours. He cannot hope for the kingdom of the heavens, whose finger or wand abuses the heaven. End of On Idolatry, chapters 1 through 9, by Tertullian. Read by Ryan Fahey. On Idolatry, chapters 10 through 15, by Tertullian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 10 of Schoolmasters and Their Difficulties. Moreover, we must inquire likewise touching schoolmasters, nor only them, but also all other professors of literature. Nay, on the contrary, we must not doubt that they are in affinity with manifold idolatry. First, in that it is necessary for them to preach the gods of the nations, to express their names, genealogies, honorable distinctions, all and singular. Further, to observe the solemnities and festivals of the same, as of them by whose means they compute their revenues. What schoolmaster without a table of the 7 idols will yet frequent the quinquatria? The very first payment of every pupil he consecrates both to the honor and to the name of Minerva, so that even though he be not said to eat of that which is sacrificed to idols, nominally, not being dedicated to any particular idol, he is shunned as an idolater. What less of defilement does he incur on that ground than a business which, both nominally and virtually, is publicly consecrated to an idol brings? The Minervalia are as much Minervas as the Saturnalia Saturns. Saturns, which must necessarily be celebrated even by little slaves at the time of the Saturnalia. New Year's gifts likewise must be caught at, and the Septimontium kept, and all the presents of midwinter and the feast of dear kinsmanship must be exacted. The schools must be wreathed with flowers, the flamens' wives and the aediles sacrifice. The school is honored on the appointed holy days. The same thing takes place on an idol's birthday. Every pomp of the devil is frequented. Who will think that these things are befitting to a Christian master, except him who shall think them suitable likewise to one who is not a master? We know it may be said, if teaching literature is not lawful to God's servants, neither will learning be likewise. And how would one be trained unto ordinary human intelligence, or unto any sense or action whatever, since literature is the means of training for all life? How do we repudiate secular studies, without which divine studies cannot be pursued? Let us see then the necessity of literary erudition. Let us reflect that partly it cannot be admitted, partly cannot be avoided. Learning literature is allowable for believers rather than teaching, for the principle of learning and of teaching is different. If a believer teach literature, while he is teaching, doubtless he commends. While he delivers, he affirms. While he recalls, he bears testimony to the praises of idols interspersed therein. He seals the gods themselves with this name, whereas the law, as we have said, prohibits the names of gods to be pronounced, and this name to be conferred on vanity. Hence, the devil gets men's early faith built up from the beginnings of their erudition. Inquire whether he who catechizes about idols commit idolatry. But when a believer learns these things, if he is already capable of understanding what idolatry is, he neither receives nor allows them, much more if he is not yet capable. Or, when he begins to understand, it behooves him first to understand what he has first learnt, that is, touching God and the faith. Therefore he will reject those things, and will not receive them, and will be as safe as one who knowingly accepts poison from one who knows it not, but does not drink it. To him, necessity is attributed as an excuse, because he has no other way to learn. Moreover, the not teaching literature is as much easier than the not learning, as it is easier, too, for the pupil not to attend, than for the master not to frequent the rest of the defilements incident to the schools from public and scholastic solemnities. Chapter 11. Connection between covetousness and idolatry. Certain trades, however gainful, to be consequently avoided. If we think over the rest of faults, tracing them from their generations, beginning with covetousness, a root of all evils wherewith, indeed, some having been ensnared, have suffered shipwreck about faith, albeit covetousness is by the same apostle called idolatry, in the next place, proceeding to mendacity, the minister of covetousness. Of false swearing I am silent, since even swearing is not lawful. Is trade adapted for a servant of God? But, covetousness apart, what is the motive for acquiring? When the motive for acquiring ceases, there will be no necessity for trading. Grant now that there be some righteousness in business, secure from the duty of watchfulness against covetousness and mendacity. I take it that that trade which pertains to the very soul and spirit of idols, which pampers every demon, falls under the charge of idolatry. Rather, is not that the principle of idolatry? If the selfsame merchandises, frankincense I mean, and all other foreign productions, used as sacrifice to idols, are of use likewise to men for medicinal ointments, to us Christians also, over and above, for solaces of sepulture, let them see to it. At all events, while the pomps, while the priesthoods, while the sacrifices of idols are being furnished by dangers, by losses, by inconveniences, by cogitations, by runnings to and fro, or trades, what else are you demonstrated to be but an idol's agent? Let none contend that, in this way, exception may be taken to all trades. All graver faults extend the sphere for diligence and watchfulness proportionably to the magnitude of the danger, in order that we may withdraw not only from the faults, but from the means through which they have being. For although the fault be done by others, it makes no difference if it be by my means. In no case ought I to be necessary to another, while he is doing what to me is unlawful. Hence, I ought to understand that care must be taken by me, lest what I am forbidden to do be done by my means. In short, in another cause of no lighter guilt, I observe that forejudgment. For, in that I am interdicted from fornication, I furnish nothing of help or connivance to others for that purpose. For, in that I have separated my own flesh itself from stews, I acknowledge that I cannot exercise the trade of pandering, or keep that kind of places for my neighbor's behoof. So, too, the interdiction of murder shows me that a trainer of gladiators also is excluded from the church, nor will anyone fail to be the means of doing what he subministers to another to do. Behold, here is a more kindred forejudgment. If a purveyor of the public victims come over to the faith, will you permit him to remain permanently in that trade? Or, if one who is already a believer shall have undertaken that business, will you think that he is to be retained in the church? No, I take it, unless anyone will dissemble in the case of a frankincense seller too. In sooth, the agency of blood pertains to some, that of odors to others. If before idols were in the world, idolatry, hitherto shapeless, used to be transacted by these wares, if, even now, the work of idolatry is perpetrated, for the most part, without the idol, by burning of odors, the frankincense seller is an even more serviceable something, even toward demons. For idolatry is more easily carried on without the idol than without the frankincense seller's ware. Let us ask thoroughly the conscience of the faith itself. With what mouth will a Christian frankincense seller, if he shall pass through temples, with what mouth will he spit down upon and blow out the smoking altars, for which himself has made provision? With what consistency will he exercise his own fostered children, to whom he affords his own house as storeroom? Let not him, indeed, if he shall have ejected a demon, congratulate himself on his faith, for he has not ejected an enemy. He ought to have easily had his prayer granted by one whom he is daily feeding. No art, then, no profession, no trade, which administers either to equipping or forming idols, can be free from the title of idolatry, unless we interpret idolatry to be altogether something else than the service of idol tendance. Chapter 12. Further answers to the plea, How am I to live? In vain do we flatter ourselves as to the necessities of human maintenance, if, after faith sealed, we say, I have no means to live. For here I will now answer more fully that abrupt proposition. It is advanced too late, for deliberation should have been made before, after the similitude of that most prudent builder, who first computes the costs of the work together with his own means, lest, when he has begun, he afterward blush to find himself spent. But even now you have the Lord's sayings, as examples taking away from you all excuse. For what is it you say? I shall be in need, but the Lord calls the needy happy. I shall have no food, but think not, says he, about food. And as an example of clothing we have the lilies. My work was my subsistence. Nay, but all things are to be sold and divided to the needy. But provision must be made for children and posterity. None, putting his hand on the plow and looking back, is fit for work. But I was under contract. None can serve two lords. If you wish to be the Lord's disciple, it is necessary you take your cross and follow the Lord. Your cross, that is, your own straits and tortures, or your body only, which is after the manner of a cross. Parents, wives, children will have to be left behind for God's sake. Do you hesitate about arts and trades, and about professions likewise, for the sake of children and parents? Even there was it demonstrated to us that both dear pledges and handicrafts and trades are to be quite left behind for the Lord's sake, while James and John, called by the Lord, do leave quite behind both father and ship, while Matthew is roused up from the toll booth, while even burying a father was too tardy a business for faith. None of them whom the Lord chose to him said, I have no means to live. Faith fears not famine. It knows, likewise, that hunger is no less to be contemned by it for God's sake than every kind of death. It has learnt not to respect life, how much more food? How many have fulfilled these conditions? But what with men is difficult, with God is easy. Let us, however, comfort ourselves about the gentleness and clemency of God in such wise as not to indulge our necessities up to the point of affinities with idolatry, but to avoid even from afar every breath of it as of a pestilence, not merely in the cases forementioned, but in the universal series of human superstition, whether appropriated to its gods, or to the defunct, or to kings, as pertaining to the selfsame unclean spirits, sometimes through sacrifices and priesthoods, sometimes through spectacles and the like, sometimes through holy days. Chapter 13, of the observance of holy days connected with idolatry. But why speak of sacrifices and priesthoods? Of spectacles, moreover, and pleasures of that kind, we have already filled a volume of their own. In this place must be handled the subject of holy days and other extraordinary solemnities, which we accord sometimes to our wantonness, sometimes to our timidity, in opposition to the common faith and discipline. The first point, indeed, on which I shall join issue is this: whether a servant of God ought to share with the very nations themselves in matters of this kind, either in dress or in food or in any other kind of their gladness. To rejoice with the rejoicing and grieve with the grieving is said about brethren by the apostle when exhorting to unanimity. But for these purposes there is naught of communion between light and darkness, between life and death, or else we rescind what is written, the world shall rejoice, but ye shall grieve. If we rejoice with the world, there is reason to fear that with the world we shall grieve too. But when the world rejoices, let us grieve, and when the world afterward grieves, we shall rejoice. Thus, too, Eleazar in Hades, attaining refreshment in Abraham's bosom, the rich man, on the other hand, set in the torment of fire, compensate, by an answerable retribution, their alternate vicissitudes of evil and good. There are certain gift days which with some adjust the claim of honor, with others the debt of wages. Now then, you say, I shall receive back what is mine, or pay back what is another's. If men have consecrated for themselves this custom from superstition, why do you, estranged as you are from all their vanity, participate in solemnities consecrated to idols, as if for you also there were some prescript about a day, to prevent your paying or receiving what you owe a man, or what is owed you by a man, short of the observance of a particular day? Give me the form after which you wish to be dealt with. For why should you skulk withal, when you contaminate your own conscience by your neighbor's ignorance? If you are not unknown to be a Christian, you are tempted, and you act as if you were not a Christian against your neighbor's conscience. If, however, you shall be disguised withal, you are the slave of the temptation. At all events, whether in the latter or the former way, you are guilty of being ashamed of God. But whosoever shall be ashamed of me in the presence of men, of him will I too be ashamed, says he, in the presence of my Father who is in the heavens. Chapter 14, of blasphemy, and of St. Paul's saying, I please all in all things. But, however, the majority of Christians have by this time induced the belief in their mind that it is pardonable if at any time they do what the heathen do, for fear the name be blasphemed. Now the blasphemy which must quite be shunned by us in every way is, I take it, this: if any of us lead a heathen into blasphemy with good cause, either by fraud, or by injury, or by contumely, or any other matter of worthy complaint, in which the name is deservedly impugned, so that the Lord too be deservedly angry. Else, if of all blasphemy it has been said, by your means my name is blasphemed, we all perish at once. Since the whole circus, with no desert of ours, assails the name with wicked suffrages, let us cease to be Christians, and it will not be blasphemed. On the contrary, while we are, let it be blasphemed, in the observance, not the overstepping, of discipline, while we are being approved, not while we are being reprobated. O blasphemy bordering on martyrdom, which now attests me to be a Christian, while for that very account it detests me. The cursing of well-maintained discipline is a blessing of the name. If, says he, I wished to please men, I should not be Christ's servant. But the same apostle elsewhere bids us take care to please all. As I, he says, please all by all means. No doubt he used to please them by celebrating the Saturnalia and New Year's Day. Or was it by moderation and patience, by gravity, by kindness, by integrity? In like manner, when he is saying, I have become all things to all, that I may gain all, does he mean to idolaters an idolater, to heathens a heathen, to the worldly worldly? But albeit he does not prohibit us from having our conversation with idolaters and adulterers, and the other criminals, saying, otherwise ye would go out from the world, of course he does not so slacken those reins of conversation that, since it is necessary for us both to live and to mingle with sinners, we may be able to sin with them too. Where there is the intercourse of life, which the apostle concedes, there is sinning, which no one permits. To live with heathens is lawful, to die with them is not. Let us live with all, let us be glad with them, out of community of nature, not of superstition. We are peers in soul, not in discipline. Fellow possessors of the world, not of error. But if we have no right of communion in matters of this kind with strangers, how far more wicked to celebrate them among brethren? Who can maintain or defend this? The Holy Spirit upbraids the Jews with their holy days. Your Sabbaths and new moons and ceremonies, says he, my soul hateth. By us, to whom Sabbaths are strange, and the new moons and festivals formerly beloved by God, the Saturnalia and New Year's and midwinter's festivals and matronalia are frequented. Presents come and go, New Year's gifts, games join their noise, banquets join their din. O better fidelity of the nations to their own sect, which claims no solemnity of the Christians for itself. Not the Lord's Day, not Pentecost, even if they had known them, would they have shared with us, for they would fear lest they should seem to be Christians. We are not apprehensive lest we seem to be heathens. If any indulgence is to be granted to the flesh, you have it. I will not say your own days, but more too. For to the heathens each festive day occurs but once annually. You have a festive day every 8th day. Call out the individual solemnities of the nations, and set them out into a row, they will not be able to make up a Pentecost. Chapter 15. Concerning festivals in honor of emperors, victories, and the like. Examples of the 3 children and Daniel. But let your works shine, saith he, but now all our shops and gates shine. You will nowadays find more doors of heathens without lamps and laurel wreaths than of Christians. What does the case seem to be with regard to that species of ceremony also? If it is an idol's honor, without doubt an idol's honor is idolatry. If it is for a man's sake, let us again consider that all idolatry is for man's sake. Let us again consider that all idolatry is a worship done to men, since it is generally agreed, even among their worshippers, that aforetime the gods themselves of the nations were men. And so it makes no difference whether that superstitious homage be rendered to men of a former age or of this. Idolatry is condemned, not on account of the persons which are set up for worship, but on account of those its observances, which pertain to demons. The things which are Caesar's are to be rendered to Caesar. It is enough that he said in apposition thereto, and to God the things which are God's. What things then are Caesar's? Those, to wit, about which the consultation was then being held, whether the poll tax were to be furnished to Caesar or no. Therefore, too, the Lord demanded that the money should be shown him, and inquired about the image, whose it were. And when he had heard it was Caesar's, said, Render what are Caesar's to Caesar, and what are God's to God. That is, the image of Caesar, which is on the coin, to Caesar, and the image of God, which is on man, to God, so as to render to Caesar indeed money, to God yourself. Otherwise, what will be God's if all things are Caesar's? Then, do you say, The lamps before my doors and the laurels on my posts are an honor to God? They are there, of course, not because they are an honor to God, but to him who is honored in God's stead by ceremonial observances of that kind, so far as is manifest, saving the religious performance, which is in secret appertaining to demons. For we ought to be sure, if there are any whose notice it escapes, through ignorance of this world's literature, that there are among the Romans even gods of entrances. Cardia, hinge goddess, called after hinges, and Forculus, door god, after doors, and Lementinus, threshold god, after the threshold, and Janus, gate god, himself after the gate. And of course we know that, though names be empty and feigned, yet when they are being drawn down into superstition, demons and every unclean spirit seize them for themselves, through the bond of consecration. Otherwise, demons have no name individually, but they there find a name where they find also a token. Among the Greeks likewise, we read of Apollo Thyreus, i.e. of the door, and the Entellii or Enthelii, demons, as presiders over entrances. These things, therefore, the Holy Spirit foreseeing from the beginning, forechanted through the most ancient prophet Enoch, that even entrances would come into superstitious use. For we see, too, that other entrances are adored in the baths. But if there are beings which are adored in entrances, it is to them that both the lamps and the laurels will pertain. To an idol you will have done whatever you shall have done to an entrance. In this place I call a witness on the authority also of God, because it is not safe to suppress whatever may have been shown to one, of course for the sake of all. I know that a brother was severely chastised the same night through a vision, because on the sudden announcement of public rejoicings, his servants had wreathed his gates. And yet himself had not wreathed or commanded them to be wreathed, for he had gone forth from home before, and on his return had reprehended the deed. So strictly are we appraised with God in matters of this kind, even with regard to the discipline of our family. Therefore, as to what relates to the honors due to kings or emperors, we have a prescript sufficient, that it behoves us to be in all obedience, according to the apostles' precept, subject to magistrates and princes and powers, but within the limits of discipline, so long as we keep ourselves separate from idolatry. For it is for this reason, too, that example of the three brethren has forerun us, who, in other respects obedient toward King Nebuchadnezzar, rejected with all constancy the honor to his image, proving that whatever is extolled beyond the measure of human honor unto the resemblance of divine sublimity is idolatry. So, too, Daniel, in all other points submissive to Darius, remained in his duty so long as it was free from danger to his religion. For, to avoid undergoing that danger, he feared the royal lions no more than they the royal fires. Let, therefore, them who have no light light their lamps daily. Let them over whom hell fires are imminent affix to their posts laurels doomed presently to burn. To them the testimonies of darkness and the omens of their penalties are suitable. You are a light of the world, and a tree ever green. If you have renounced temples, make not your own gate a temple. I have said too little. If you have renounced stews, clothe not your own house with the appearance of a new stew. End of On Idolatry, chapters 10 through 15, by Tertullian. Read by Ryan Fahey. On Idolatry, chapters 16 through 24, by Tertullian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 16, Concerning Private Festivals. Touching the ceremonies, however, of private and social solemnities, as those of the white toga, of espousals, of nuptials, of name-givings, I should think no danger need be guarded against from the breath of the idolatry which is mixed up with them. For the causes are to be considered to which the ceremony is due. Those above named I take to be clean in themselves, because neither manly garb nor the marital ring or union descends from honors done to any idol. In short, I find no dress cursed by God, except a woman's dress on a man. For cursed, saith he, is every man who clothes himself in woman's attire. The toga, however, is a dress of manly name as well as of manly use. Also, God no more prohibits nuptials to be celebrated than a name to be given. But there are sacrifices appropriated to these occasions. Let me be invited, and let not the title of the ceremony be assistance at a sacrifice, and the discharge of my good offices is at the service of my friends. Would that it were at their service indeed, and that we could escape seeing what is unlawful for us to do. But since the evil one has so surrounded the world with idolatry, it will be lawful for us to be present at some ceremonies which see us doing service to a man, not to an idol. Clearly, if invited unto priestly function and sacrifice, I will not go, for that is service peculiar to an idol. But neither will I furnish advice, or expense, or any other good office in a matter of that kind. If it is on account of the sacrifice that I be invited, and stand by, I shall be partaker of idolatry. If any other cause conjoins me to the sacrificer, I shall be merely a spectator of the sacrifice. Chapter 17. The cases of servants and other officials considered. What offices a Christian man may hold. But what shall believing servants or children do? Officials likewise, when attending on their lords or patrons or superiors, when sacrificing. Well, if any one shall have handed the wine to a sacrificer, nay, if by any single word, necessary or belonging to a sacrifice, he shall have aided him, he will be held to be a minister of idolatry. Mindful of this rule, we can render service even to magistrates and powers, after the example of the patriarchs and the other forefathers, who obeyed idolatrous kings up to the confine of idolatry. Hence arose, very lately, a dispute whether a servant of God should take the administration of any dignity or power, if he be able, whether by some special grace or by adroitness, to keep himself intact from every species of idolatry, after the example that both Joseph and Daniel, clean from idolatry, administered both dignity and power in the livery and purple of the prefecture of entire Egypt or Babylonia. And so let us grant that it is possible for any one to succeed in moving, in whatsoever office, under the mere name of the office, neither sacrificing nor lending his authority to sacrifices, not farming out victims, not assigning to others the care of temples, not looking after their tributes, not giving spectacles at his own or the public charge, or presiding over the giving them, making proclamation or edict for no solemnity, not even taking oaths. Moreover, what comes under the head of power, neither sitting in judgment on anyone's life or character, for you might bear with his judging about money, neither condemning nor forecondemning, binding no one, imprisoning or torturing no one, if it is credible that all this is possible. Chapter 18, concerning dress as connected with idolatry. But we must now treat of the garb only and apparatus of office. There is a dress proper to every one, as well for daily use as for office and dignity. That famous purple, therefore, and the gold as an ornament of the neck, were, among the Egyptians and Babylonians, ensigns of dignity, in the same way as bordered or striped or palm-embroidered togas, and the golden wreaths of provincial priests are now, but not on the same terms. For they used only to be conferred, under the name of honor, on such as deserved the familiar friendship of kings, whence, too, such used to be styled the purpled men of kings, just as among us some, from their white toga, are called candidates, but not on the understanding that that garb should be tied to priesthoods also, or to any idol ceremonies. For if that were the case, of course men of such holiness and constancy would instantly have refused the defiled dresses, and it would instantly have appeared that Daniel had been no zealous slave to idols, nor worshipped Bel, nor the dragon, which long after did appear. That purple, therefore, was simple, and used not at that time to be a mark of dignity among the barbarians, but of nobility. For as both Joseph, who had been a slave, and Daniel, who through captivity had changed his state, attained the freedom of the states of Babylon and Egypt through the dress of barbaric nobility, so among us believers also, if need so be, the bordered toga will be able to be conceded to boys, and the stole to girls, as ensigns of birth, not of power, of race, not of office, of rank, not of superstition. But the purple or the other ensigns of dignities and powers, dedicated from the beginning to idolatry engrafted on the dignity and the powers, carry the spot of their own profanation. Since, moreover, bordered and striped togas and broad-barred ones are put even on idols themselves, and fasces also and rods are borne before them, and deservedly, for demons are the magistrates of this world. They bear the fasces and the purples, the ensigns of one college. What end, then, will you advance if you use the garb indeed, but administer not the functions of it? In things unclean, none can appear clean. If you put on a tunic defiled in itself, it perhaps may not be defiled through you, but you, through it, will be unable to be clean. Now by this time, you who argue about Joseph and Daniel know that things old and new, rude and polished, begun and developed, slavish and free, are not always comparable. For they, even by their circumstances, were slaves, but you, the slave of none, insofar as you are the slave of Christ alone, who has freed you likewise from the captivity of the world, will incur the duty of acting after your Lord's pattern. That Lord walked in humility and obscurity with no definite home, for the Son of Man, said he, hath not where to lay his head. Unadorned in dress, for else he had not said, Behold, they who are clad in soft raiment are in kings' houses. In short, inglorious in countenance and aspect, just as Isaiah withal had foreannounced. If, also, he exercised no right of power even over his own followers, to whom he discharged menial ministry, if, in short, though conscious of his own kingdom, he shrank back from being made a king, he in the fullest manner gave his own an example for turning coldly from all the pride and garb, as well of dignity as of power. For, if they were to be used, who would rather have used them than the Son of God? What kind and what number of fasces would escort him? What kind of purple would bloom from his shoulders? What kind of gold would beam from his head, had he not judged the glory of the world to be alien both to himself and to his? Therefore what he was unwilling to accept, he has rejected. What he rejected, he has condemned. What he condemned, he has counted as part of the devil's pomp. For he would not have condemned things, except such as were not his. But things which are not God's can be no others but the devil's. If you have forsworn the devil's pomp, know that whatever there you touch is idolatry. Let even this fact help to remind you that all the powers and dignities of this world are not only alien to, but enemies of God, that through them punishments have been determined against God's servants. Through them, too, penalties prepared for the impious are ignored. But both your birth and your substance are troublesome to you in resisting idolatry. For avoiding it, remedies cannot be lacking, since, even if they be lacking, there remains that one by which you will be made a happier magistrate, not in the earth, but in the heavens. Chapter 19, concerning military service. In that last section, decision may seem to have been given likewise concerning military service, which is between dignity and power. But now inquiry is made about this point, whether a believer may turn himself onto military service, and whether the military may be admitted onto the faith, even the rank and file, or each inferior grade, to whom there is no necessity for taking part in sacrifices or capital punishments. There is no agreement between the divine and the human sacrament, the standard of Christ and the standard of the devil, the camp of light and the camp of darkness. One soul cannot be due to two lords, God and Caesar, and yet Moses carried a rod, and Aaron wore a buckle, and John, Baptist, is girt with leather, and Joshua, the son of Nun, leads a line of march, and the people warred, if it pleases you to sport with the subject. But how will a Christian man war? Nay, how will he serve even in peace, without a sword, which the Lord has taken away? For albeit soldiers had come unto John, and had received the formula of their rule, albeit, likewise, a centurion had believed, still the Lord afterward, in disarming Peter, unbelted every soldier. No dress is lawful among us, if assigned to any unlawful action. Chapter 20, concerning idolatry in words. But, however, since the conduct according to the divine rule is imperiled, not merely by deeds, but likewise by words, for, just as it is written, Behold the man and his deeds, so out of thy own mouth shalt thou be justified. We ought to remember that even in words, also the inroad of idolatry must be foreguarded against, either from the defect of custom or of timidity. The law prohibits the gods of the nations from being named, not of course that we are not to pronounce their names, the speaking of which common intercourse extorts from us. For this must very frequently be said. You find him in the temple of Aesculapius, and I live in Isis Street, and he has been made priest of Jupiter, and much else after this manner, since even on men names of this kind are bestowed. For I do not honor Saturnus if I call a man so, addressing him by his own name. I honor him no more than I do Marcus, if I call a man Marcus. But it says, Make not mention of the name of other gods, neither be it heard from thy mouth. The precept it gives is this, that we do not call them gods. For in the first part of the law, too, Thou shalt not, saith he, use the name of the Lord thy God in a vain thing, that is, in an idol. Whoever, therefore, honors an idol with the name of God has fallen into idolatry. But if I must speak of them as gods, something must be added to make it appear that I do not call them gods. For even the Scripture names gods, but adds their, viz. Of the nations. Just as David does when he had named gods, where he says, But the gods of the nations are demons. But this has been laid by me rather as a foundation for ensuing observations. However, it is a defect of custom to say, By Hercules, so help me the God of faith. Well, to the custom is added the ignorance of some, who are ignorant that it is an oath by Hercules. Further, what will an oath in the name of gods whom you have forsworn be, but a collusion of faith with idolatry? For who does not honor them in whose name he swears? Chapter 21, of silent acquiescence in heathen formularies. But it is a mark of timidity when some other man binds you in the name of his gods, by the making of an oath, or by some other form of attestation, and you, for fear of discovery, remain quiet. For you, equally, by remaining quiet, affirm their majesty, by reason of which majesty you will seem to be bound. What matters it whether you affirm the gods of the nations by calling them gods, or by hearing them so called? Whether you swear by idols, or, when adjured by another, acquiesce. Why should we not recognize the subtleties of Satan, who makes it his aim, that, what he cannot effect by our mouth, he may effect by the mouth of his servants, introducing idolatry into us through our ears? At all events, whoever the adjurer is, he binds you to himself either in friendly or unfriendly conjunction. If in unfriendly, you are now being challenged unto battle, and know that you must fight. If in friendly, with how far greater security will you transfer your engagement unto the Lord, that you may dissolve the obligation of him through whose means the evil one was seeking to annex you to the honor of idols, that is, to idolatry. All sufferance of that kind is idolatry. You honor those to whom, when imposed as authorities, you have rendered respect. I know that one, whom the Lord pardon, when it had been said to him in public during a lawsuit, Jupiter be wroth with you, answered, on the contrary, with you. What else would a heathen have done who believed Jupiter to be a god? Even if he had not retorted the malediction in the name of the same Jupiter, or in the name of any like to Jupiter, he had affirmed Jupiter to be a god, at being cursed in whose name he, by returning the curse, had shown himself indignant. For what is there to be indignant at, if cursed in the name of one whom you know to be nothing? For if you rave, you immediately affirm his existence, and the profession of your fear will be an act of idolatry. How much more, while you are returning the malediction in the name of Jupiter himself, are you doing honor to Jupiter in the same way as he who provoked you? But a believer ought to laugh in such cases, not to rave. Nay, according to the precept, not to return a curse in the name of God even, but clearly to bless in the name of God, that you may both demolish idols and preach God and fulfill discipline. Chapter 22, of accepting blessing in the name of idols. Equally, one who has been initiated into Christ will not endure to be blessed in the name of the gods of the nations, so as not always to reject the unclean benediction, and to cleanse it out for himself by converting it Godward. To be blessed in the name of the gods of the nations is to be cursed in the name of God. If I have given an alms, or shown any other kindness, and the recipient pray that his gods, or the genius of the colony, may be propitious to me, my oblation or act will immediately be an honor to idols, in whose name he returns me the favor of blessing. But why should he not know that I have done it for God's sake, that God may rather be glorified, and demons may not be honored in that which I have done for the sake of God? If God sees that I have done it for his sake, he equally sees that I have been unwilling to show that I did it for his sake, and have in a manner made his precept a sacrifice to idols. Many say, no one ought to divulge himself, but I think neither ought he to deny himself. For whoever dissembles in any cause whatever, by being held as a heathen, does deny, and, of course, all denial is idolatry, just as all idolatry is denial, whether in deeds or in words. Chapter 23, concerning written contracts in the name of idols, and tacit consent thereto. But there is a certain species of that class, doubly sharpened in deed and word, and mischievous on either side, although it flatter you, as if it were free of danger in each, while it does not seem to be a deed, because it is not laid hold of as a word. In borrowing money from heathens under pledged securities, Christians give a guarantee under oath, and deny themselves to have done so. Of course, the time of the prosecution and the place of the judgment seat, and the person of the presiding judge, decide that they knew themselves to have so done. Christ prescribes that there is to be no swearing. I wrote, says the debtor, but I said nothing. It is the tongue, not the written letter, which kills. Here I call nature and conscience as my witnesses. Nature, because even if the tongue, in dictating, remains motionless and quiet, the hand can write nothing which the soul has not dictated, albeit even to the tongue itself the soul may have dictated either something conceived by itself, or else something delivered by another. Now, lest it be said, another dictated, I here appeal to conscience to witness whether, what another dictated, the soul entertains, and whether with the concomitance or the inaction of the tongue, transmits unto the hand. And it is enough that the Lord has said that faults are committed in the mind and the conscience. If concupiscence or malice have ascended into a man's heart, he saith it is held as a deed. You therefore have given a guarantee, which clearly has ascended into your heart, which you can neither contend you were ignorant of nor unwilling. For when you gave the guarantee, you knew that you did it. When you knew, of course you were willing. You did it as well in act as in thought, nor can you by the lighter charge exclude the heavier, so as to say that it is clearly rendered false, by giving a guarantee for what you do not actually perform. Yet I have not denied because I have not sworn. You have, since, even if you had done no such thing as you have done, you would still even so be said to swear, if you have consented to have done it. Silence of voice is an unavailing plea in a case of writing, and muteness of sound in a case of letters. But, however, Zacharias, when punished with a temporary privation of voice, held colloquy with his mind, and, passing by his bootless tongue, with the help of his hands dictates from his heart, and without his mouth pronounces the name of his son. In his pen there speaks, in his waxen tablet there is heard, a hand clearer than every sound, a letter more vocal than every mouth. Inquire whether a man have spoken who is understood to have spoken. Pray we the Lord that no necessity for that kind of contract may ever encompass us, and if it should so fall out, may he give our brethren the means of helping us, or give us constancy to break off the bonds of all such necessity, lest those denying letters, the substitutes for our mouth, be brought forward against us in the day of judgment, sealed with the seals, not now of witnesses, but of angels. Chapter 24, General Conclusion. Amid these reefs and inlets, amid these shallows and straits of idolatry, faith, her sails filled by the Spirit of God, navigates, safe if cautious, secure if intently watchful. But to such as are washed overboard is a deep whence is no outswimming. To such as are run aground is inextricable shipwreck. To such as are engulfed is a whirlpool, where there is no breathing, in idolatry. All waves thereof whatsoever suffocate, every eddy thereof sucks down unto Hades. Let no one say, who will so safely foreguard himself? We shall have to go out of the world. As if it were not as well worth while to go out as to stand in the world as an idolater. Nothing can be easier than caution against idolatry, if the fear of it be our leading fear. Any necessity whatever is too trifling compared to such a peril. The reason why the Holy Spirit did, when the apostles at that time were consulting, relax the bond and yoke for us, was that we might be free to devote ourselves to the shunning of idolatry. This shall be our law, the more fully to be administered, the more ready it is to hand. A law peculiar to Christians, by means whereof we are recognized and examined by heathens. This law must be set before such as approach unto the faith, and inculcated on such as are entering it, that in approaching they may deliberate, observing it may persevere, not observing it may renounce their name. For we will see to it, if, after the type of the ark, there shall be in the church raven, and kite, and dog, and serpent. At all events, an idolater is not found in the type of the ark. No animal has been fashioned to represent an idolater. Let not that be in the church which was not in the ark. End of On Idolatry, chapters 16 through 24, by Tertullian. Read by Ryan Fahey.
On the Spectacles, chapters 1 to 9, by Tertullian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ye servants of God, about to draw near to God, that you may make solemn consecration of yourselves to him, seek well to understand the condition of faith, the reasons of the truth, the laws of Christian discipline, which forbid, among other sins of this world, the pleasures of the public shows. Ye who have testified and confessed that you have already done so, review the subject, that there may be no sinning, whether through real or wilful ignorance. For such is the power of earthly pleasures, that to retain the opportunity of still partaking of them, it contrives to prolong a willing ignorance, and bribes knowledge into playing a dishonest part. To both things, perhaps, some among you are allured by the views of the heathens, who in this matter are wont to press us with such arguments as these, that the exquisite enjoyments of ear and eye we have in external things are not in the least opposed to religion in the mind and conscience, and that surely no offence is offered to God in any human enjoyment, at any of our pleasures, which, with all due reverence and honour secured to him, it is not sinful to partake of in its own time and place. But this is precisely what we are ready to prove, that these things are not consistent with true religion and true obedience to the true God. There are some who imagine that Christians, a sort of people ever ready to die, are trained into the abstinence they practice with no other object than that of making it less difficult to despise life, the fastenings to it being, as it were, severed, of quenching all desires for what they have emptied, so far as they are concerned, of all that is desirable. So it is thought to be rather a thing of human planning and foresight than clearly laid down by divine command. It were a grievous thing, forsooth, for Christians, while continuing in the enjoyments of pleasures so great, to die for God. It is not as they say, though, if it were, even Christian obstinacy might well give all submission to a plan so suitable, to a rule so excellent. Then again, every one is ready with the argument that all things, as we teach, were created by God, and given to man for his use, and that they must all be good, as coming all from so good a source, but that among them are found the various constituent elements of the public shows, such as the horse, the lion, bodily strength, and musical voice. It cannot, then, be thought that what exists by God's own creative will is either foreign or hostile to him, and if it is not opposed to him, it cannot be regarded as injurious to his worshippers, as certainly it is not foreign to them. Beyond all doubt, too, the very buildings connected with the places of public amusement, composed as they are of rocks, stones, marbles, pillars, are things of God, who has given these various things for the earth's embellishment. Nay, the very scenes are enacted under God's own heaven. How skilful a pleader seems human wisdom to herself, especially if she has the fear of losing any of her delights, any of the sweet enjoyments of worldly existence. In fact, you will find not a few whom the imperiling of their pleasures rather than their life holds back from us, for even the weakling has no strong dread of death as a debt he knows is due by him, while the wise man does not look with contempt on pleasure, regarding it as a precious gift, in fact, the one blessedness of life, whether to philosopher or fool. Now, nobody denies what nobody is ignorant of, For nature herself is teacher of it, that God is the maker of the universe, and that it is good, and that it is man's by free gift of its maker. But having no intimate acquaintance with the highest, knowing him only by natural revelation, and not as his friends afar off, and not as those who have been brought nigh to him, men cannot but be in ignorance alike of what he enjoins and what he forbids in regard to the administration of his world. They must be ignorant too of the hostile power which works against him, and perverts to wrong uses the things his hand has formed, for you cannot know either the will or the adversary of a God you do not know. We must not then consider merely by whom all things were made, but by whom they have been perverted. We shall find out for what use they were made at first, when we find for what they were not. There is a vast difference between the corrupted state and that of primal purity, just because there is a vast difference between the Creator and the corrupter. Why, all sorts of evils, which as indubitably evils even the heathens prohibit, and against which they guard themselves, come from the works of God. Take, for instance, murder, whether committed by iron, by poison, or by magical enchantments. Iron and herbs and demons are all equally creatures of God. Has the Creator withal provided these things for man's destruction? Nay, he puts his interdict on every sort of man-killing by that one summary precept, Thou shalt not kill. Moreover, who but God, the maker of the world, put in it gold, brass, silver, ivory, wood, and all the other materials used in the manufacture of idols? Yet has he done this that men may set up a worship in opposition to himself. On the contrary, idolatry in his eyes is the crowning sin. What is there offensive to God which is not God's? But in offending him it ceases to be his, and in ceasing to be his it is in his eyes an offending thing. Man himself, guilty as he is of every iniquity, is not only a work of God, he is his image, and yet both in soul and body he has severed himself from his Maker. For we did not get eyes to minister to lust, and the tongue to speak evil with, and ears to be receptacle of evil speech, and the throat to serve the vice of gluttony, and the belly to be gluttony's ally, and the genitals for unchaste excesses, and the hands for deeds of violence, and the feet for an erring life. Or was the soul placed in the body that it might become a thought manufactory of snares and frauds and injustices? I think not, for if God, as the righteous extractor of innocence, hates everything like malignity, if he hates utterly such plotting of evil, it is clear beyond a doubt that, of all things that have come from his hand, he has made none to lead to works which he condemns, even though these same works may be carried on by things of his making. For in fact, it is the one ground of condemnation that the creature misuses the creation. We therefore, who in our knowledge of the Lord have obtained some knowledge also of his foe, who in our discovery of the Creator have at the same time laid hands upon the great corrupter, ought neither to wonder nor to doubt that, as the prowess of the corrupting and God-opposing angel overthrew in the beginning the virtue of man, the work and image of God, the possessor of the world, he has entirely changed man's nature, created like his own for perfect sinlessness, into his own state of wicked enmity against his Maker, that in the very thing whose gift to man, but not to him, had grieved him, he might make man guilty in God's eyes, and set up his own supremacy. Fortified by this knowledge against heathen views, let us rather turn to the unworthy reasonings of our own people. For the faith of some, either too simple or too scrupulous, demands direct authority from Scripture for giving up the shows, and holds out that the matter is a doubtful one, because such abstinence is not clearly and in words imposed upon God's servants. Well, we never find it expressed with the same precision, Thou shalt not enter circus or theatre, thou shalt not look on combat or show. As it is plainly laid down, Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not worship an idol, thou shalt not commit adultery or fraud. But we find that the first word of David bears on this very sort of thing. Blessed, he says, is the man who has not gone into the assembly of the impious, nor stood in the way of sinners, nor sat in the seat of scorners. For though he seems to have predicted beforehand of that just man, that he took no part in the meetings and deliberations of the Jews, taking counsel about the slaying of our Lord, yet divine Scripture has ever far-reaching applications. After the immediate sense has been exhausted, in all directions it fortifies the practice of the religious life, so that here also you have an utterance which is not far from a plain interdicting of the shows. For if he called those few Jews an assembly of the wicked, how much more will he so designate so vast a gathering of heathens? Are the heathens less impious, less sinners, less enemies of Christ, than the Jews were then? and see, too, how other things agree, for at the shows they also stand in the way. For they call the spaces between the seats going round the amphitheatre, and the passages which separate the people running down, ways. The place in the cove where matrons sit is called a chair. Therefore, on the contrary, it holds, unblessed is he who has entered any council of wicked men, and has stood in any way of sinners, and has sat in any chair of scorners. We may understand a thing spoken generally, even when it requires a certain special interpretation to be given to it. For some things spoken with a special reference contain in them general truth. When God admonishes the Israelites of their duty or sharply reproves them, he has surely a reference to all men. When he threatens destruction to Egypt or Ethiopia, he surely pre-condemns every sinning nation whatever. If reasoning from species to genus, every nation that sins against them is in Egypt and Ethiopia, so also reasoning from genus to species, with reference to the origin of shows, every show is an assembly of the wicked. Lest anyone think that we are dealing in mere argumentative subtleties, I shall turn to that highest authority of our seal itself. When entering the water, we make profession of the Christian faith in the words of its rule. We bear public testimony that we have renounced the devil, his pomp, and his angels. Well, is it not in connection with idolatry above all that you have the devil with his pomp and his angels? From which, to speak briefly, for I do not wish to dilate, you have every unclean and wicked spirit. If therefore it shall be made plain that the entire apparatus of the shows is based upon idolatry, beyond all doubt that will carry with it the conclusion that our renunciatory testimony in the laver of baptism has reference to the shows, which, through their idolatry, have been given over to the devil and his pomp and his angels. We shall set forth, then, their several origins, in what nursing places they have grown to manhood. Next, the titles of some of them, by what names they are called, then their apparatus, with what superstitions they are observed, then their places, to what patrons they are dedicated, then the arts which minister to them, to what authors they are traced. If any of these shall be found to have had no connection with an idol god, it will be held as free at once from the taint of idolatry, and as not coming within the range of our baptismal abjuration. In the matter of their origins, as these are somewhat obscure, and but little known to many among us, our investigations must go back to a remote antiquity, and our authorities be none other than books of heathen literature. Various authors are extant who have published works on the subject. The origin of the games, as given by them, is this. Timaeus tells us that immigrants from Asia, under the leadership of Tertullian, who, in a contest about his native kingdom, had succumbed to his brother, settled down in Etruria. Well, among other superstitious observances under the name of religion, they set up in their new home public shows. The Romans, at their own request, obtained from them skilled performers, the proper seasons, the name too, for it is said they are called ludi, from lidi. And though Varro derives the name of ludi from ludus, that is, from play, as they called the luperci, also ludi, because they ran about making sport, still that sporting of young men belongs, in his view, to festal days and temples and objects of religious veneration. However, it is of little consequence the origin of the name, when it is certain that the thing springs from idolatry. For the Liberalia, under the general designation of Ludi, clearly declared the glory of Father Bacchus, for to Bacchus these festivities were first consecrated by grateful peasants, in return for the boon he conferred on them, as they say, making known the pleasures of wine. Then the Consualia were called Ludi, and at first were in honour of Neptune, for Neptune has the name of Consus also. Thereafter Romulus dedicated the Equira to Mars, though they claim the Consualia too for Romulus, on the ground that he consecrated them to Consus, the god, as they will have it, of counsel. Of the council, forsooth, in which he planned the rape of the Sabine virgins for wives to his soldiers. An excellent counsel truly, and still, I suppose, reckoned just and righteous by the Romans themselves, I may not say by God. For this goes also to taint the origin. You cannot surely hold that to be good which has sprung from sin, from shamelessness, from violence, from hatred, from a fratricidal founder, from a son of Mars. Even now, at the first turning-post in the circus, there is a subterranean altar to this same Consus, with an inscription to this effect: Consus, great in council, Mars in battle, mighty tutelar deities. The priests of the state sacrifice at it on the nuns of July, the priest of Romulus and the Vestals on the 12th before the calends of September. In addition to this, Romulus instituted games in honor of Jupiter Feretrius on the Tarpeian hill, according to the statement Piso has handed down to us, called both Tarpeian and Capitoline. After him, Numa Pompilius instituted games to Mars and Robigo, for they have also invented a goddess of rust. Then Tullus Hostilius, then Ancus Martius, and various others in succession did the like. As to the idols in whose honour these games were established, ample information is to be found in the pages of Suetonius Tranquillus, but we need say no more to prove the accusation of idolatrous origin. To the testimony of antiquity is added that of later games instituted in their turn, and betraying their origin from the titles which they bear even at the present day, in which it is imprinted, as on their very face, for what idol and for what religious object games, whether of the one kind or the other, were designed. You have festivals bearing the name of the Great Mother and Apollo, of Ceres too, and Neptune and Jupiter Latiaris, and Flora, all celebrated for a common end. The others have their religious origin in the birthdays and solemnities of kings, in public successes, in municipal holidays. There are also testamentary exhibitions in which funeral honours are rendered to the memories of private persons, and this according to an institution of ancient times. For from the first the Ludi were regarded as of two sorts, sacred and funereal, that is, in honour of the heathen deities and of the dead. But in the matter of idolatry it makes no difference with us under what name or title it is practised, while it has to do with the wicked spirits whom we abjure. If it is lawful to offer homage to the dead, it will be just as lawful to offer it to their gods. You have the same origin in both cases. There is the same idolatry. There is, on our part, the same solemn renunciation against all idolatry. The two kinds of public games, then, have one origin, and they have common names, as owning the same parentage. So, too, as they are equally tainted with the sin of idolatry, their foundress, they must needs be like each other in their pomp. But the more ambitious preliminary display of the circus games, to which the name procession specially belongs, is, in itself, the proof to whom the whole thing appertains, in the many images, the long line of statues, the chariots of all sorts, the thrones, the crowns, the dresses. What high religious rites besides, what sacrifices precede, come between and follow, how many guilds, how many priesthoods, how many offices are set astir, is known to the inhabitants of the great city in which the demon convention has its headquarters. If these things are done in humbler style in the provinces, in accordance with their inferior means, still all circus games must be counted as belonging to that from which they are derived. The fountain from which they spring defiles them. For the tiny streamlet from its very springhead, the little twig from its very budding, contains in it the essential nature of its origin. It may be grand or mean, no matter, any circus procession whatever is offensive to God. Though there be few images to grace it, there is idolatry in one. Though there be no more than a single sacred car, it is a chariot of Jupiter. Anything of idolatry whatever, whether meanly arrayed or modestly rich and gorgeous, taints it in its origin. To follow out my plan in regard to places, the circus is chiefly consecrated to the sun, whose temple stands in the middle of it, and whose image shines forth from its temple summit, for they have not thought it proper to pay sacred honours underneath a roof to an object they have itself in open space. Those who assert that the first spectacle was exhibited by Circe, and in honour of the sun her father, as they will have it, maintain also the name of circus was derived from her. Plainly, then, the enchantress did this in the name of the parties whose priestess she was, I mean the demons and spirits of evil. What an aggregation of idolatries you see, accordingly, in the decoration of the place. Every ornament of the circus is a temple by itself. The eggs are regarded as sacred by the castors, by men who are not ashamed to profess faith in their production from the egg of a swan, which was no other than Jupiter himself. The dolphins vomit forth in honour of Neptune, images of Cessia, so called as the goddess of sowing, of Messia, so called as the goddess of reaping, of Tertullian, so called as the fruit-protecting deity, load the pillars. In front of these you have 3 altars to these 3 gods, great, mighty, victorious. They reckon these of Samothrace. The huge obelisk, as Hermetales affirms, is set up in public to the sun. Its inscription, as its origin, belongs to Egyptian superstition. Cheerless were the demon gathering without their Mater Magna, and so she presides there over the Euripus. Consus, as we have mentioned, lies hidden underground at the Murcian goals. These two sprang from an idol. For they will have it that Murcia is the goddess of love, and to her at that spot they have consecrated a temple. See, Christian, how many impure names have taken possession of the circus. You have nothing to do with a sacred place which is tenanted by such multitudes of diabolical spirits. And speaking of places, this is the suitable occasion for some remarks in anticipation of a point that some will raise. What then, you say? Shall I be in danger of pollution if I go to the circus when the games are not being celebrated? There is no law forbidding the mere places to us. For not only the places for show gatherings, but even the temples may be entered without any peril of his religion by the servant of God, if he has only some honest reason for it, unconnected with their proper business and official duties. Why, even the streets, and the marketplace, and the baths, and the taverns, and our very dwelling places are not altogether free from idols. Satan and his angels have filled the whole world. It is not by merely being in the world, however, that we lapse from God, but by touching and tainting ourselves with the world's sins. I shall break with my Maker, that is, by going to the Capitol, or the temple of Serapis to sacrifice or adore, as I shall also do by going as a spectator to the circus and the theatre. The places in themselves do not contaminate, but what is done in them, from which even the places themselves, we maintain, become defiled. The polluted things pollute us. It is on this account that we set before you to whom places of the kind are dedicated, that we may prove the things which are done in them to belong to the idol patrons, to whom the very places are sacred. Now, as to the kind of performances peculiar to the circus exhibitions, in former days equestrianism was practised in a simple way on horseback, and certainly its ordinary use had nothing sinful in it, but when it was dragged into the games, it passed from the service of God into the employment of demons. Accordingly, this kind of circus performances is regarded as sacred to Castor and Pollux, to whom, Stesichorus tells us, horses were given by Mercury, and Neptune too, in an equestrian deity by the Greeks called Hippias. In regard to the team, they have consecrated the chariot and four to the sun, the chariot and pair to the moon. But as the poet has said it, quote, Erichthonius first dared to yoke 4 horses to the chariot, and to ride upon its wheels with victorious swiftness, end quote. Erichthonius, the son of Vulcan and Minerva, fruit of unworthy passion upon earth, is a demon monster, nay, the devil himself, and no mere snake. But if Trochilus the Argive is maker of the first chariot, he dedicated that work of his to Juno. If Romulus first exhibited the 4-horse chariot at Rome, he too, I think, has a place given him among idols, at least if he and Quirinius are the same. But as chariots and such inventors, the charioteers were naturally dressed too in the colours of idolatry, for at first these were only 2, namely white and red, the former sacred to the winter and its glistening snows, the latter sacred to the summer with its ruddy sun, but afterwards, in the progress of luxury as well as of superstition, red was dedicated by some to Mars, and white by others to the Zephyrs, while green was given to Mother Earth, or spring, and azure to the sky and sea, or autumn. But as idolatry of every kind is condemned by God, that form of it surely shares the condemnation which is offered to the elements of nature. End of On the Spectacles, chapters 1 to 9, by Tertullian. On the Spectacles, chapter 10 to 19, by Tertullian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Let us pass on now to theatrical exhibitions, which we have already shown have a common origin with the circus, and bear like idolatrous designations, even as from the first they have borne the name of Lodi, and equally minister to idols. They resemble each other also in their pomp, having the same procession to the scene of their display from temples and altars, and that mournful profusion of incense and blood, with music of pipes and trumpets, all under the direction of a soothsayer and the undertaker, those 2 foul masters of funeral rites and sacrifices. So as we went on from the origin of the Ludi to the circus games, we shall now direct our course thence to those of the theatre, beginning with the place of exhibition. At first the theatre was properly a temple of Venus, and, to speak briefly, it was owing to this that the stage performances were allowed to escape censure, and got a footing in the world. For ofttimes the censors, in the interests of morality, put down above all the rising theatres, foreseeing as they did that there was great danger of their leading to a general profligacy, so that already, from this accordance of their own people with us, there is a witness to the heathen, and in the anticipatory judgment of human knowledge even a confirmation of our views. Accordingly, Pompey the Great, less only than his theatre when he had erected that citadel of all impurities, fearing some time or other censorian condemnation of his memory, superimposed on it a temple of Venus, and summoning by public proclamation the people to its consecration, he called it not a theatre but a temple, quote, under which, said he, we have placed tiers of seats for viewing the shows, end quote. So he threw a veil over a structure on which condemnation had been often passed, and which is ever to be held in reprobation, by pretending that it was a sacred place, and by means of superstition he blinded the eyes of a virtuous discipline. But Venus and Bacchus are close allies. These two evil spirits are in sworn confederacy with each other as the patrons of drunkenness and lust. So the theatre of Venus is as well the house of Bacchus, for they probably gave the name of Liberalia also to other theatrical amusements, which, besides being consecrated to Bacchus, as were the Dionysia of the Greeks, were instituted by him, and without doubt the performances of the theatre have the common patronage of these two deities. That immodesty of gesture and attire which so specially and peculiarly characterizes the stage are consecrated to them. The one deity wanton by her sex, the other by his drapery, while its services of voice and song and lute and pipe belong to Apollos and Muses and Minervas and Mercuries. You will hate, O Christian, the things whose authors must be the objects of your utter detestation. So we would now make a remark about the arts of the theatre, about the things also whose authors, in the names we execrate. We know that the names of the dead are nothing, as are their images, but we know well enough too, who, when images are set up, under these names carry on their wicked work, and exult in the homage rendered to them, and pretend to be divine, none other than spirits accursed, than devils. We see, therefore, that the arts also are consecrated to the service of beings who dwell in the names of their founders, and that things cannot be held free from the taint of idolatry, whose inventors have got a place among the gods for their discoveries. Nay, as regards the arts, we ought to have gone further back and barred all further argument by the position that the demons, predetermining in their own interests from the first, among other evils of idolatry, the pollutions of the public shows, with the object of drawing man away from his Lord and binding him to their own service, carried out their purpose by bestowing on him the artistic gifts which the shows require, for none but themselves would have made provision and preparation for the objects they had in view, nor would they have given the arts to the world by any but those in whose names and images and histories they set up for their own goals the artifice of consecration. In fulfilment of our plan, let us now go on to consider the combats. Their origin is akin to that of the games, ludi. Hence they are kept as either sacred or funereal, as they have been instituted in honor of the idol gods of the nations or of the dead. Thus, too, they are called Olympian in honor of Jupiter, known at Rome as the Calyptoni, Nemean in honor of Hercules, Isthmian in honor of Neptune, the rest mortuari, as belonging to the dead. What wonder then if idolatry pollutes the combat parade with profane crowns, with sacerdotal chiefs, with attendants belonging to the various colleges, last of all with the blood of its sacrifices. To add a completing word about the place, in the common place for the College of the Arts, sacred to the Muses, and Apollo and Minerva, and also for that of the arts dedicated to Mars, they with contest and sound of trumpet emulate the circus in the arena, which is a real temple. I mean of the god whose festivals it celebrates. The gymnastic arts also originated with their Castors and Herculeses and Mercuries. It remains for us to examine the spectacle most noted of all, and in highest favour. It is called a dutiful service, monus, from its being an office, for it bears the name of officium as well as monus. The ancients thought that in this solemnity they rendered offices to the dead. At a later period, with a cruelty more refined, they somewhat modified its character. For formerly, in the belief that the souls of the departed were appeased by human blood, they were in the habit of buying captives or slaves of wicked disposition, and immolating them in their funeral obsequies. Afterwards they thought good to throw the veil of pleasure over their iniquity. Those, therefore, whom they had provided for the combat, and then trained in arms as best they could, only that they might learn to die, they, on the funeral day, killed at the places of sepulture. They alleviated death by murders. Such is the origin of the munus. But by degrees their refinement came up to their cruelty, for these human wild beasts could not find pleasure exquisite enough, save in the spectacle of men torn to pieces by wild beasts. Offerings to propitiate the dead, then, were regarded as belonging to the class of funeral sacrifices, and as these are idolatry, for idolatry, in fact, is a sort of homage to the departed, the one as well as the other is a service to dead men. Moreover, demons have abode in the images of the dead. To refer also to the matter of names, though this sort of exhibition has passed from honours of the dead to honours of the living, I mean to quaestorships and magistracies, to priestly offices of different kinds, yet since idolatry still cleaves to the dignity's name, whatever is done in its name partakes of its impurity. The same remark will apply to the procession of the munus, as we look at that in the pomp which is connected with these honours themselves, for the purple robes, the fasces, the fillets, the crowns, the proclamations too, and edicts, the sacred feasts of the day before, are not without the pomp of the devil, without invitation of demons. What need then of dwelling on the place of horrors, which is too much even for the tongue of the perjurer? For the amphitheatre is consecrated to names more numerous and more dire than is the Capitol itself, temple of all demons as it is. There are as many unclean spirits there as holds men. To conclude with a single remark about the arts which have a place in it, we know that its two sorts of amusement have for their patrons Mars and Diana. We have, I think, faithfully carried out our plan of showing in how many different ways the sin of idolatry clings to the shows, in respect of their origins, their titles, their equipments, their places of celebration, their arts, and we may hold it as a thing beyond all doubt, that for us who have twice renounced all idols, they are utterly unsuitable. Not that an idol is anything, as the Apostle says, but the homage that they render is to demons, who are the real occupants of these consecrated images, whether of dead men, or, as they think, of gods. On this account, therefore, because they have a common source, for their dead and their deities are one, we abstain from both idolatries. Nor do we dislike the temples less than the monuments. We have nothing to do with either altar. We adore neither image, we do not offer sacrifices to the gods, and we make no funeral oblations to the departed. Nay, we do not partake of what is offered, either in the one case or the other, for we cannot partake of God's feast and the feast of devils. If then we keep throat and belly free from such defilements, how much more do we withhold our nobler parts, our ears and eyes, from the idolatrous and funereal enjoyments which are not passed through the body, but are digested in the very spirit and soul, whose purity, much more than that of our bodily organs, God has a right to claim from us. Having sufficiently established the charge of idolatry, which alone ought to be reason enough for our giving up the shows, let us now, ex abundanti, look at the subject in another way, for the sake of those especially who keep themselves comfortable in the thought that the abstinence we urge is not in so many words enjoined, as if in the condemnation of the lust of the world there was not involved a sufficient declaration against all these amusements. For as there is a lust of money, or rank, or eating, or impure enjoyment, or glory, so there is also a lust of pleasure. But the show is just a sort of pleasure. I think, then, that under the general designation of lusts, pleasures are included. In like manner, under the general idea of pleasures, you have, as a specific class, the shows. But we have spoken already of how it is with the places of exhibition, that they are not polluting in themselves, but owing to the things that are done in them, from which they imbibe impurity, and then spurt it again on others. Having done enough, then, as we have said, in regard to that principal argument, that there is in them all the taint of idolatry, having sufficiently dealt with that, let us now contrast the other characteristics of the things of the show with the things of God. God has enjoined us to deal calmly and gently and quietly and peacefully with the Holy Spirit, because these things are alone in keeping with the goodness of his nature, with his tenderness and sensitiveness, not to vex him with rage or ill nature or anger or grief. Well, how shall this be made to accord with the shows? For the show always leads to spiritual agitation. For when there is pleasure, there is keenness of feeling, giving pleasure its zest, and where there is keenness of feeling, there is rivalry, giving in turn its zest to that. Then, too, where you have rivalry, you have rage, and bitterness, and wrath, and grief, and all bad things which flow from them, the whole entirely out of keeping with the religion of Christ. For even suppose one should enjoy the shows in a moderate way, as befits his rank, or age, or nature, Still he is not undisturbed in mind, without some unuttered movings of the inner man. No one partakes of pleasures such as these without their strong excitements. No one comes under their excitements without their natural lapses. These lapses again create passionate desire. But if there is no desire, there is no pleasure, and he is chargeable with trifling who goes where nothing is gotten. But in my view even that is foreign to us, and moreover a man pronounces his own condemnation in the very act of taking his place among those with whom, by his disinclination to be like them, he confesses he has no sympathy. It is not enough that we do no such things ourselves, unless we break all connection also with those who do. If thou sawest a thief, says the Scripture, thou consentedst with him. Would that we did not even inhabit the same world with these wicked men. But, though that wish cannot be realized, yet even now we are separate from them in what is of the world, for the world is God's, but the worldly is the devil's. Since then all passionate excitement is forbidden us, we are debarred from every kind of spectacle, and especially from the circus, where such excitement presides as in its proper element. See the people coming to it already under strong emotion, already tumultuous, already passion-blind, already agitated about their bets. The praetor is too slow for them, their eyes are ever rolling as though along with the lots in his urn. Then they hang all eager on the signal. There is the united shout of a common madness. Observe how out of themselves they are by their foolish speeches. He has thrown it, they exclaim, and they announce each one to his neighbour what all have seen. I have clearest evidence of their blindness. They do not see what is really thrown. They think it a signal cloth, but it is the likeness of the devil cast headlong from on high, and the result accordingly is that they fly into rages and passions and discords, and all that they who are consecrated to peace ought never to indulge in. Then there are curses and reproaches with no cause of hatred, there are cries of applause with nothing to merit them. What are the partakers in all this? Not their own masters, to obtain of it for themselves, unless it may be that another makes them not their own. They are saddened by another's sorrow, they are gladdened by another's joy. Whatever they desire on the one hand or detest on the other is entirely foreign to themselves. So love with them is a useless thing, and hatred is unjust. Or is a causeless love perhaps more legitimate than a causeless hatred? God certainly forbids us to hate even with a reason for our hating, for he commands us to love our enemies. God forbids us to curse, though there be some ground for doing so, in commanding that those who curse us we are to bless. But what is more merciless than the circus, where people do not spare even their rulers and fellow citizens? If any of its madnesses are becoming elsewhere in the saints of God, they will be seemly in the circus too, but if they are nowhere right, so neither are they there. Are we not in like manner enjoined to put away from us all immodesty? On this ground again we are excluded from the theatre, which is immodesty's own peculiar abode, where nothing is in repute but what elsewhere is disreputable. So the best path to the highest favour of its God is the vileness which the Tertullian gesticulates, which the buffoon in woman's clothes exhibits, destroying all natural modesty, so that they blush more readily at home than at the play, which finally is done from his childhood on the person of the pantomime, that he may become an actor. The very harlots, too, victims of the public lust, are brought upon the stage, their misery increased as being there in the presence of their own sex, from whom alone they are wont to hide themselves. They are paraded publicly before every age and every rank. Their abode, their gains, their praises are set forth, and that even in the hearing of those who should not hear such things. I say nothing about other matters, which it were good to hide away in their own darkness and their own gloomy caves, lest they should stain the light of day. Let the Senate, let all ranks blush for very shame. Why, even these miserable women, who by their own gestures destroy their modesty, dreading the light of day and the people's gaze, know something of shame at least once a year. But if we ought to abominate all that is immodest, on what ground is it right to hear what we must not speak? For all licentiousness of speech, nay, every idle word, is condemned by God. Why, in the same way is it right to look on what is disgraceful to do. How is it that the things which defile a man in going out of his mouth are not regarded as doing so when they go in at his eyes and ears, when eyes and ears are the immediate attendants on the spirit, and that can never be pure whose servants in waiting are impure? You have the theatre forbidden, then, in the forbidding of immodesty. If again we despise the teaching of secular literature as being foolishness in God's eyes, our duty is plain enough in regard to those spectacles which from this source derive the tragic or comic play. If tragedies or comedies are the bloody and wanton, the impious and licentious inventors of crimes and lusts, it is not good even that there should be any calling to remembrance the atrocious or the vile. What you reject in deed, you are not to bid welcome to in word. But if you argue that the racecourse is mentioned in Scripture, I grant it at once, but you will not refuse to admit that the things which are done there are not for you to look upon, the blows, the kicks and cuffs, and all the recklessness of hand, and everything like that disfiguration of the human countenance, which is nothing less than the disfiguration of God's own image. You will never give your approval to those foolish racing and throwing feats, and yet more foolish leapings. You will never find pleasure in injurious or useless exhibitions of strength. Certainly you will not regard with approval those efforts after an artificial body which aim at surpassing the Creator's work. And you will have the very opposite of complacency in the athlete's grease, in the inactivity of peace feeds up. And the wrestler's art is a devil's thing. The devil wrestled with and crushed to death the first human beings. Its very attitude has power in it, in the serpent kind, firm to hold, tortuous to clasp, slippery to glide away. You have no need of crowns. Why do you strive to get pleasure from crowns? We shall now see how the Scriptures condemn the amphitheatre. If we can maintain that it is right to indulge in the cruel and the impious and the fierce, let us go there. If we are what we are said to be, let us regale ourselves there with human blood. It is good, no doubt, to have the guilty punished. Who but the criminal himself will deny that, and yet the innocent can find no pleasure in another's sufferings? He rather mourns that a brother has sinned so heinously as to need a punishment so dreadful. But who is my guarantee that it is always the guilty who are adjudged to the wild beasts, or to some other doom, and that the guiltless never suffer from the revenge of the judge, or the weakness of the defence, or the pressure of the rack? How much better, then, is it for me to remain ignorant of the punishment inflicted on the wicked, lest I am obliged to know also of the good coming to untimely ends, if I may speak of goodness in the case at all. At any rate, gladiators, not chargeable with crime, are offered in sale for the games, that they may become the victims of the public pleasure. Even in the case of those who are judicially condemned to the amphitheatre, what a monstrous thing is it, that, in undergoing their punishment, they, from some less serious delinquency, advance to the criminality of manslayers. But I mean these remarks for heathens. As to Christians, I shall not insult them by adding another word as to the aversion with which they should regard this sort of exhibition, though no one is more able than myself to set forth fully the whole subject, unless it be one who is still in the habit of going to the shows. I would rather withal be incomplete than set memory a-working. End of On the Spectacles, chapters 10 to 19 by Tertullian. On the Spectacles, chapters 20 to 30 by Tertullian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. How vain, then, nay, how desperate is the reasoning of persons who, just because they decline to lose a pleasure, hold out that we cannot point to the specific words or the very place where this abstinence is mentioned, and where the servants of God are directly forbidden to have anything to do with such assemblies. I heard lately a novel defence of himself by a certain play-lover. Quote, "The sun," said he, "nay, God himself, looks down from heaven on the show, and no pollution is contracted." End quote. Yes, and the sun too pours down his rays into the common sewer without being defiled. As for God, would that all crimes were hid from his eye, that we might all escape judgment. But he looks on robberies too, he looks on falsehoods, and adulteries, and frauds, and idolatries, and these same shows, and precisely on that account we will not look on them, lest the all-seeing see us. You are putting on the same level, O man, the criminal and the judge, the criminal who is a criminal because he has seen, and the judge who is a judge because he sees. Are we set, then, on playing the madman outside the circus boundaries? Outside the gates of the theatre are we bent on lewdness, and outside the course on arrogance, and outside the amphitheatre on cruelty, because outside the porticos and the tiers and the curtains too God has eyes? Never and nowhere is that free from blame which God ever condemns. Never and nowhere is it right to do what you may not do at all times and in all places. It is the freedom of the truth from change of opinion and varying judgments which constitutes its perfection and gives it its claims to full mastery and unchanging reverence and faithful obedience. That which is really good or really evil cannot be aught else, but in all things the truth of God is immutable. The heathens, who have not a full revelation of the truth, for they are not taught of God, hold the thing evil and good as it suits self-will and passion, making that which is good in one place evil in another, and that which is evil in one place in another good. So it strangely happens that the same man, who can scarcely in public lift up his tunic, even when necessity of nature presses him, takes it off in the circus, as if bent on exposing himself before everybody, that the father who carefully protects and guards his virgin daughter's ears from every polluting word, takes her to the theatre himself, exposing her to all its vile words and attitudes. He again, who in the streets lays hands on or covers with reproaches the brawling pugilist, in the arena gives all encouragement to combats of a much more serious kind, and he who looks with horror on the corpse of one who has died under the common law of nature, in the amphitheatre gazes down with most patient eyes on bodies all mangled and torn and smeared with their own blood. Nay, the very man who comes to the show because he thinks murderers ought to suffer for their crime, drives the unwilling gladiator to the murderous deed with rods and scourges. And one who demands the lion for every manslayer of deeper dye will have the staff for the savage swordsman, and rewards him with the cap of liberty. Yes, and he must have the poor victim back again, that he may get a sight of his face, with zest inspecting near at hand the man whom he wished torn in pieces at safe distance from him. So much the more cruel he, if that was not his wish. What wonder is there in it? Such inconsistencies as these are just such as we might expect from men who confuse and change the nature of good and evil in their inconstancy of feeling and fickleness in judgment. Why, the authors and managers of the spectacles, in that very respect with reference to which they highly laud the charioteers, and actors and wrestlers, and those most loving gladiators to whom men prostitute their souls, women too their bodies, slight and trample on them, though for their sakes they are guilty of the deeds they reprobate. Nay, they doom them to ignominy and the loss of their rights as citizens, excluding them from the curia, from the rostra, from senatorial and equestrian rank, and from all other honours, as well as certain distinctions. What perversity! They have pleasure in those whom yet they punish. They put all slights on those to whom at the same time they award their approbation. They magnify the art and brand the artist. What an outrageous thing it is to blacken a man on account of the very things which make him meritorious in their eyes. Nay, what a confession that the things are evil when their authors, even when in highest favour, are not without a mark of disgrace upon them. Seeing then man's own reflections, even in spite of the sweetness of pleasure, lead him to think that people such as these should be condemned to a hapless lot of infamy, losing all the advantages connected with the possession of the dignities of life, how much more does the divine righteousness inflict punishment on those who give themselves to these arts? Will God have any pleasure in the charioteer who disquiets so many souls, who rouses up so many furious passions, and creates so many various moods, either crowned like a priest or wearing the colours of a pimp, decked out by the devil that he may be whirled away in his chariot, as though with the object of taking off Elijah? Will he be pleased with him who applies the razor to himself and completely changes his features, who, with no respect for his face, is not content with making it as like as possible to Saturn and Isis and Bacchus, but gives it quietly over to contumelious blows, as if in mockery of our Lord? The devil, forsooth, makes it part, too, of his teaching, that the cheek is to be meekly offered to the smiter. In the same way, with their high shoes, he has made the tragic actors taller, because none can add a cubit to his stature. His desire is to make Christ a liar. And in regard to the wearing of masks, I ask, is that according to the mind of God, who forbids the making of every likeness, and especially then the likeness of man, who is his own image? The author of truth hates all the false. He regards as adultery all that is unreal. Condemning, therefore, as he does hypocrisy in every form, he never will approve any putting on of voice or sex or age. He never will approve pretended loves and wraths and groans and tears. Then, too, as in his law it is declared that the man is cursed who attires himself in female garments, what must be his judgment of the pantomime who is even brought up to play the woman? And will the boxer go unpunished? I suppose he received these cestus scars and the thick skin of his fists and these growths upon his ears at his creation. God, too, gave him eyes for no other end than that they might be knocked out in fighting. I say nothing of him who, to save himself, thrusts another in the lion's way, that he may not be too little of a murderer when he puts to death that very same man on the arena. In how many other ways shall we yet further show that nothing which is peculiar to the shows has God's approval, or without that approval is becoming in God's servants? If we have succeeded in making it plain that they were instituted entirely for the devil's sake, and have been got up entirely with the devil's things, for all that is not God's, or is not pleasing in his eyes, belongs to his wicked rival, this simply means that in them you have that pomp of the devil which in the seal of our faith we abjure. But we should have no connection with the things which we abjure, whether in deed or word, whether by looking on them or looking forward to them. But do we not abjure and rescind that baptismal pledge when we cease to bear its testimony? Does it then remain for us to apply to the heathens themselves? Let them tell us then whether it is right in Christians to frequent the show, why the rejection of these amusements is the chief sign to them that a man has adopted the Christian faith. If anyone then puts away the faith's distinctive badge, he is plainly guilty of denying it. What hope can you possibly retain in regard to a man who does that? When you go over to the enemy's camp, you throw down your arms, desert the standards and the oath of allegiance to your chief. You cast in your lot for life or death with your new friends. Seated where there is nothing of God, will one be thinking of his Maker? Will there be peace in his soul, when there is eager strife there for a charioteer? Wrought up into a frenzied excitement, will he learn to be modest? Nay, in the whole thing, he will meet with no greater temptation than that gay attiring of the men and women, the very intermingling of emotions, the very agreements and disagreements with each other in the bestowment of their favours, where you have such close communion, blow up the sparks of passion. And then there is scarce any other object in going to the show but to see and to be seen. When a tragic actor is declaiming, will one be giving thought to prophetic appeals? Amid the measures of the effeminate player, will he call up to himself a psalm? And when the athletes are hard at struggle, will he be ready to proclaim that there must be no striking again? And with his eye fixed on the bites of bears and the sponge nets of the net fighters, can he be moved by compassion? May God avert from his people any such passionate eagerness after a cruel enjoyment. For how monstrous it is to go from God's church to the devil's, from the sky to the sty, as they say, to raise your hands to God, and then to weary them in the applause of an actor. Out of the mouth from which you uttered Amen over the holy thing, to give witness in a gladiator's favour, to cry forever to anyone else but God and Christ. Why may not those who go into the temptations of the show become accessible also to evil spirits? We have the case of the woman, the Lord himself is witness, who went to the theatre and came back possessed. In the outcasting, accordingly, when the unclean creature was upbraided with having dared to attack a believer, he firmly replied, quote, "And in truth I did it most righteously, for I found her in my domain." End quote. Another case too is well known, in which a woman had been hearing a tragedian, and on the very night she saw in her sleep a linen cloth, the actor's name being mentioned at the same time with strong disapproval, and 5 days after that woman was no more. How many other undoubted proofs we have had in the case of persons who, by keeping company with the devil in the shows, have fallen from the Lord. For no one can serve two masters. What fellowship has light with darkness, life with death? We ought to detest these heathen meetings and assemblies, if on no other account than that there God's name is blasphemed, that there the cry to the lions is daily raised against us, that from thence persecuting decrees are wont to emanate, and temptations are sent forth. What will you do if you are caught in that heaving tide of impious judgments? Not that there any harm is likely to come to you from men, nobody knows that you are a Christian, but think how it fares with you in heaven, for at the very time the devil is working havoc in the church, do you doubt that the angels are looking down from above, and marking every man who speaks and who listens to the blaspheming word, who lends his tongue and who lends his ears to the service of Satan against God? Shall you not then shun those tears where the enemies of Christ assemble, that seat of all that is pestilential, and the very superincumbent atmosphere, all impure with wicked cries? Grant that you have there things that are pleasant, things both agreeable and innocent in themselves, even some things that are excellent. Nobody dilutes poison with gall and hellebore. The accursed thing is put into condiments well seasoned and of sweetest taste. So too the devil puts into the deadly draught which he prepares things of God most pleasant and most acceptable. Everything there, then, that is either brave or noble or loud-sounding or melodious or exquisite in taste, hold it but as the honey-drop of a poisoned cake. Nor make so much of your taste for its pleasures as of the danger you run from its attractions. With such dainties as these, let the devil's guests be feasted. The places and the times, the inviter too, are theirs. Our banquets, our nuptial joys are yet to come. We cannot sit down in fellowship with them, as neither can they with us. Things in this matter go by their turns. Now they have gladness, and we are troubled. The world, says Jesus, shall rejoice, ye shall be sorrowful. Let us mourn then while the heathen are merry, that in the day of their sorrow we may rejoice, lest, sharing now in their gladness, we share then also in their grief. Thou art too dainty, Christian, if thou wouldst have pleasure in this life as well as in the next. Nay, a fool thou art, if thou thinkest this life's pleasures to be really pleasures. The philosophers, for instance, give the name of pleasure to quietness and repose. In that they have their bliss, in that they find entertainment, they even glory in it. You long for the goal, and the stage, and the dust, and the place of combat. I would have you answer me this question: can we not live without pleasure, who cannot but with pleasure die? For what is our wish but the apostles, to leave the world, and be taken up into the fellowship of our Lord? You have your joys where you have your longings. Even as things are, if your thought is to spend this period of existence in enjoyments, how are you so ungrateful as to reckon insufficient, as not thankfully to recognize the many and exquisite pleasures God has bestowed upon you? For what more delightful than to have God the Father and our Lord at peace with us, than revelation of the truth, than confession of our errors, than pardon of the sins so numerous of our past life? What greater pleasure than distaste of pleasure itself, than contempt of all that the world can give, than true liberty, than a pure conscience, a contented life, and freedom from all fear of death? What nobler than to tread under foot the gods of the nations, to exorcise evil spirits, to perform cures, to seek divine revealings, to live to God? These are the pleasures, these the spectacles that befit Christian men, holy, everlasting, free. Count of these as your circus games, fix your eyes on the courses of the world, the gliding seasons, reckon up the periods of time, long for the goal of the final consummation, defend the societies of the churches, be startled at God's signal, be roused up at the angel's trump, glory in the palms of martyrdom. If the literature of the stage delight you, we have literature in abundance of our own, plenty of verses, sentences, songs, proverbs, and these not fabulous but true, not tricks of art but plain realities. Would you have also fightings and wrestlings? Well, of these there is no lacking, and they are not of slight account. Behold, unchastity overcome by chastity, perfidy slain by faithfulness, cruelty stricken by compassion, impudence thrown into the shade by modesty. These are the contests we have among us, and in these we win our crowns. But would you have something of blood too? You have Christ's. But what a spectacle is that fast approaching advent of our Lord, now owned by all, now highly exalted, now a triumphant one. What that exaltation of the angelic hosts, what the glory of the rising saints, what the kingdom of the just thereafter, what the city New Jerusalem, yes, and there are other sights, that last day of judgment with its everlasting issues, that day unlooked for by their nations, the theme of their derision, when the world, hoary with age, and all its many products, shall be consumed in one great flame. How vast a spectacle then bursts upon the eye! What there excites my admiration, what my derision, which sight gives me joy, which rouses me to exultation, as I see so many illustrious monarchs, whose reception into the heavens was publicly announced, groaning now in the lowest darkness with great Jove himself, and those too who bore witness of their exaltation, governors of provinces too who persecuted the Christian name, in fires more fierce than those with which in the days of their pride they raged against the followers of Christ. What world's wise men besides, the very philosophers, in fact, who taught their followers that God had no concern in aught that is sublunary, and were wont to assure them that either they had no souls, or that they would never return to the bodies which at death they had left, now covered with shame before the poor deluded ones, as one fire consumes them. poets also, trembling not before the judgment seat of Rhadamanthus or Minos, but of the unexpected Christ. I shall have a better opportunity then of hearing the tragedians, louder voiced in their own calamity, of viewing the play-actors, much more dissolute in the dissolving flame, of looking upon the charioteer all glowing in his chariot of fire, of witnessing the wrestlers not in their gymnasia, but tossing in the fiery billows, unless even then I shall not care to attend to such ministers of sin in my eager wish rather to fix a gaze insatiable on those whose fury vented itself against the Lord. This, I shall say, is that carpenter's or harlot's son, that Sabbath-breaker, that Samaritan and devil-possessed. This is he whom you purchased from Judas. This is he whom you struck with reed and fist, whom you contemptuously spat upon, to whom you gave gall and vinegar to drink. This is he whom his disciples secretly stole away, that it might be said he had risen again, or the gardener abstracted, that his lettuces might come to no harm from the crowds of visitants. What quaestor or priest in his munificence will bestow on you the favour of seeing and exulting in such things as these? And yet even now we in a measure have them by faith in the picturings of imagination. But what are the things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard, and which have not so much as dimly dawned upon the human heart? Whatever they are nobler, I believe, than circus and both theatres, footnote, viz. The theatre and amphitheatre, end footnote, and every racecourse. End of On the Spectacles, chapters 20 to 30, by Tertullian.